Hey everyone, this is Daniel, and in today's Introduction to Microsoft Syntex video, we're going to start from the beginning. I'll tell you where the whole concept came from, then we'll transition over to the now. What is the current situation? And we'll also spend a little bit of time on the future releases, some of which Microsoft had announced during Ignite. Then I'll finally end with my setup because I actually use Microsoft Syntex in my day-to-day activities, specifically the receipts model. And that is actually what encouraged me to make this video because I use it. I have it set up in my tenant and I wanted to share that with you all. So stick around. This is very important because this can make a huge impact for your businesses, for your day-to-day activities as well. But first, here's my intro video. So let's start by learning a little bit about Microsoft Syntex. And as you can see in my slide deck, when I started learning about Microsoft Syntex, or when I was preparing for this content over here, I still had the slide deck as Introduction to SharePoint Syntex. And then Ignite came around. Over there, Microsoft announced that this whole concept of SharePoint Syntex is actually now transitioned into Microsoft Syntex. And that actually makes sense because Syntex is so much more than SharePoint. It just made sense to actually detach it from SharePoint, even though it is powered by SharePoint, but to go ahead and make it as a service by itself. So that's the direction that Microsoft was heading toward. We'll talk a little bit more about it in a minute. What I want to talk about is the rewind. I want to rewind back to the past and talk a little bit more about all the services that it came from and the past of it. So it all started on November 4th, 2019, when actually Project Cortex was first announced. And that's what it is. Project Cortex uses AI to reason over content across teams and systems, and then also extracting important information and automatically organizing content, which is basically everything we know about Microsoft Syntex. So the earlier days started off with Project Cortex. And as you can see, the whole concept of Syntex is actually a part of Project Cortex. That was the umbrella service that they had talked about almost 3 years ago. That's when it talked about. And now it has actually transitioned over. So then as we fast forward, Project Cortex came about as SharePoint Syntex. So let me rephrase that. SharePoint Syntex is part of the Project Cortex. And over here, this was the description. Basically, that URL that you can see in the description below, this is what it says, that Syntex is powered by AI and machine learning models to create SharePoint document libraries. To use SharePoint document libraries to extract stuff from there, the data from there. And it's all to automate that, including stuff like unstructured or semi-structured data. All of your content in SharePoint can go through some AI modeling using the SharePoint Syntex. Now, when it comes to SharePoint Syntex, this is the current situation of that. And we just talked a little bit about the past, Project Cortex. I want to fast forward now and talk a little bit about from the SharePoint Syntex standpoint. From the SharePoint Syntex, it gives you all of this situation where Power Apps AI Builder can be used to train and run. But now let's talk about these credits. So first of all, the important thing that you need to be aware of is that you need to have either one of these services already available. And you can see it's in the small business plans, enterprise plans, education plans, and government plans. Now, I'm not going to spend any time looking on how the licenses work and how the services are. What I want you to be aware of from this video is that you have to have all of these existing services, at least one of them, because SharePoint Syntex will be built on top of it. The other key takeaway that I want you to give you is that when you buy a SharePoint Syntex license, it will give you 3,500 credits, and that credits can be added on a pool. So if you had multiple users and you have SharePoint Syntex licenses for each of them, well, then that all adds up into the pools over there. And remember, this is on a per month basis, and you can have a maximum allowance of 1 million credits per month. All right, so that's the important things that I want you to talk about. So we talked a little bit about the past, we talked about the present from the SharePoint Syntex standpoint. What I want to do is also announce some of this update that was given in Ignite just a few weeks ago. So the announcement which was made on Ignite, which is October of 2022, which is actually still in this month, was the concept of Microsoft Syntex. And basically what happened was the SharePoint Syntex was taken across, and now it has become Microsoft Syntex over there, which actually makes sense because I love this one slide deck which was showed, is that granted SharePoint is part of the Microsoft Syntex, like I call Microsoft Syntex is powered by SharePoint, but Syntex is so much more than that. And therefore it falls on the top level, the top service, and that top service is powered by Microsoft Search, Microsoft Grasp, Microsoft Purview, the entire Power Platform, and then that sits on these other services such as Microsoft Graph Content Connectors, SharePoint, Microsoft Azure, and then so on and so forth, which basically sits on top of the Microsoft Cloud. So as you can see, this slide deck over here it begins to make sense why it was important to actually detach Syntex from the SharePoint and make it its own standalone service over here. I really like, because this is what resonated with me. So as we move forward over here, these are the things I want to talk about. Is what is Microsoft Syntex? Microsoft Syntex is basically all of these 4 services combined together. So yes, it is part of the Microsoft 365 because that's where we use SharePoint. It's got the Microsoft Azure services. It does leverage Purview for all its compliances and securities factors involved, but it also leverages Power Platform. In fact, the video demo that I'm going to show at the end, I'm going to use Power Automate for that. So I love this. Again, this was taken from the Ignite session that Microsoft Syntex is using all of these services, and that's why it just made sense to detach it from SharePoint and make it a service by itself. So now that you understand a little bit of what Microsoft Syntex is all about, let's actually go and take a look at all that it is part of. So Microsoft Syntex falls under these 2 categories, or these 2 categories fall under Microsoft Syntex, which is the pre-built and the custom. Now in pre-built, there's actually 2 pre-built items already available, 2 pre-built models already available, the receipt and the invoice. In fact, the demo that I'm going to show you is already a receipt. Now this is always evolving. So say you already watching this video, a month or 2 months or a year after I uploaded it or published it, you might actually see more pre-built models. But right now, as we stand, this is what it is. There's a pre-built and a custom. Pre-built has invoices, pre-built has receipts, and in the custom, it breaks it down into 2 sections. There's the document understanding and the form processing. So what I want to do is actually talk a little bit more about what all of this sits on, because when you go ahead and use any of those models, it actually saves it in SharePoint, but SharePoint uses what's called as the model content type. So anytime that you're going ahead and doing the training, and after you've done the training, it says, okay, which content type do you want to assign it to? Because these content types will have their content type columns. Well, you need to understand what is this whole concept of content type. Because when you're going ahead and creating your model, it will ask you this question, which is, do you want to create a new content type or you want to use an existing content type? So it's very important that you understand what this whole content type is. Now I want to step back and actually say that if you're a SharePoint person who's watching this video, then you already know this, because folks from the SharePoint side have understood the content types which have been powered by SharePoint for years. So this might not be actually new stuff to you, but if you are the fresh coming in, understanding what Microsoft Syntex, and you know that, okay, I understand a little bit about SharePoint, you need to be familiar with this concept as well. This is why I want to spend a few minutes talking and doing an introduction to content types and content types publishing. So quickly about the concept of content types is that a SharePoint content types pulls together an item and information about that item. So take, for example, that you actually have a certain situation and you want to go ahead and assign columns, and you want to assign all the specific columns for that type. Well, that's the whole definition of content types. So for example, you can define a whole sales contract content type and add it to a library for your teams to use it. And so for that sales contract, you could have very specific columns that you want to assign, especially when you're uploading a document which have to do with sales over there. So it's very important from that standpoint. So as you can continue over here, I'll see that if, hey, I had a sales contract, in that same contract, I want actually these columns which are associated for that content. So salesperson, client company, purchase order number, so on and so forth. These are ideal content type columns for my sales contract content. So it's kind of making sense now that content type is not just a technical term for some stuff. It is really defined as what is the content you are working with. In this example, we are doing with the sales document. So let's define that as a sales content type. Let's associate it with the correct metadata type of columns, such as the person, client, company, and then make that its own content, which you can go ahead and reuse again and again across your entire SharePoint and your tenant. So it just made sense to use this for the model content type when it came to Microsoft Syntex, because not only is something that you can customize the model with the content type, but you can reuse it again and again. So it just makes sense to use SharePoint as the platform for Microsoft Syntex, because it has the functionality to go and create its own content types, which is nothing that had to be built specifically for that. It was a tried, tested content type model, which we've used for years and years on SharePoint. And so it just makes sense to go ahead and actually use this functionality. So when it came to the model content type, like I showed in that screenshot below, there's two options. There's a new content type, and then there's the existing content type. So for all of you SharePoint admins, you already know this, that if you go to your SharePoint Admin Center, you will actually go and see right under the content services, there's a section called Content Type Library. And in your Content Type Library, you can go ahead and create all of these content types. And in fact, I'll just demo to you the content type I created for my receipts. So again, this is a tried and tested service from the SharePoint standpoint, and now it has gone ahead and stepped up further to make it available for Microsoft Syntex as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Microsoft Syntex again, right? So I showed you that this was the pre-built one, this was the custom one, and these were the subsections to that. Well, the demo that I'm going to show you, it's called as the pre-built receipts. For that, all I had to do was actually just create my own custom content type for that and then create my own columns. But the whole model was already pre-built. And that was the beauty of it. And I'll spend a little bit more time talking about it in the future. Just wanted to call that out. Well, pre-built ones are usually really good to start with, but I do want to spend a little bit more time on the custom one. So like I said, the custom one has document understanding and forms processing. Well, there's a little bit of differences between the two. So over here, there's something called a structured, unstructured, and semi-structured. That basically means that anytime you're going ahead and getting documents over, some of that could be very structured. So forms processing is a very structured format. As you can see, most of the forms, most of the invoices, they have this one template. And if you've gone ahead and looked at a lot of forms, a lot of invoices, their overall template designs will actually be the same. Because yes, you will have on the header section where you've got the company information, invoice number, receipt number, stuff like that. Those can change a little bit, but you can do that training so that AI picks up all of these subtle differences. And then the body of it was basically just the tables. And that is so much more common, consistent across all of these forms. And therefore the term comes out as structured, because it just makes sense that the overall structure of forms or invoices is pretty much consistent. Yeah, there's a little bit of subtle changes from the header and the footer side, but it's very structured design over there. Now, unstructured includes things such as contract renewal letters that can be written in different ways. And let's think about it. I mean, in your lifetime, you have signed some contract for something, whether it was the vehicle you purchased for, whether it was the apartment that you stayed in or the house that you bought. You have dealt with the contract. In fact, for some of you, I might be even bringing back some bad memories. But understand the fact that contracts vary, not just from the scenario, whether it was a vehicle or was an apartment or a house, but each of them have their own different sides of contracts. So to go and capture important metadata such as who the contract was for, what was the actual date of the contract, any numbers in the contract which you want to get, well, those could be spread out anywhere in the documentation. Granted, most of those are always in the first page, but it could be spread out anywhere. And so hence the term unstructured, but then AI can still go ahead and do a lot of training, and you can do some training on that. In fact, I'll spend a whole separate video training and teaching you about unstructured document and how you can go and do that. I just want to call out that contracts is a great example for unstructured one. Now, semi-structured falls under the unstructured because you could have some of these contracts which are very consistent, like same company, same contract. Well, subtle changes could happen on the body of it, but overall it is still a contract. So it is not 100% unstructured, but it does fall under that category, and hence the term semi-structured. So this is just an overview of what Microsoft Syntex is. We talked a little bit about the past, it came from the Project Cortex realm, how it was SharePoint Syntex, renamed it into Microsoft Syntex, and then also some of the things in the future, and renamed it into Microsoft Syntex. Well, what I want to do is I want to now do the demo, how I was able to use Microsoft Syntex for my receipts. So let's spend a little bit of time looking at my tenant. So here I am in my personal tenant. This is the tenant that I use for all of my personal reasons, my emails, day-to-day activities, all of it over here. And so now I'm in the admin center. When I come to the admin center, the first thing I want to show you is that I actually went in for my account. I went and purchased a Microsoft Syntex license. I purchased one Microsoft Syntex license. And as you can see over here, when I come to my active users and I actually go and search for myself, Daniel Christian, over here, you will actually see that right there, I click on it and I will actually go to my licenses and apps. And as I scroll all the way bottom, you will see that I have a SharePoint Syntex license assigned to myself. This is something that I just did for myself because there's other options. You can do the Azure pay-as-you-go functionality as well. But remember, this was one person in my company that I wanted to use it. And so I went and actually purchased the license and I assigned it to myself. So that's the first thing I wanted to show you is how I went and did that. Next is I went to actually go to my org settings, which is right over here in my settings, went to org settings, and in the org settings, if you actually scroll all the way to the bottom, you will see SharePoint Syntex. Now in SharePoint Syntex, when you click on it, it actually gives you this option on the right. And over here, it does go ahead and give you the functionality of what are the types you want to use. Is it a forms processing? Is it a document understanding? But this is also where you go ahead and start setting up all your SharePoint Syntex stuff. Now I've already gone ahead and done that, which is why I already have my admin content center. Now, the admin content center is just another SharePoint site, but it's a very specific content center site. So that's the key thing that you gotta remember. When you go and create a site for it, it has to be the content center or the content types type of a site. So what I do is I actually go on and created that. So now if I just click on it, it goes ahead and sends me to this site. Now over here, all of these things that you see, the models and all of the usage and everything that I have, all of this happens because I am the one coming over here and I have a license assigned to me. If you don't, you might still have access to the site, but you will start getting some messages over here saying that, hey, you don't have the license to see all of these features and functionalities. And that's something that I saw also because as I was learning along, when I assigned the license over here, it actually took a few hours for the license to take effect. So when I came in, I saw those messages that, hey, you don't have the license for all these services. But then when I came back in a few hours, it all worked over here. But this is it. This is I call it as my admin content center. But the moment you start seeing things such as models and you start seeing all of these updates and reporting functionalities that you see for models, you know that your syntax is working. So the one that I went and did was for my receipts classifier. Now, one of the things I did prior to this was I actually created my own content type ahead of it. So let me show you that. All right, I'm going to go back to my SharePoint admin center. So we'll go back over here. We'll go under the admin settings to SharePoint. And in SharePoint, right over here, you will see that under content services, you have the content type gallery. And in my content type gallery, most of it, you will see that it's already existing over here. Some of these you may already see, but the new one that I went in and added was receipts. And you can see the receipts is a document content types, and it says the last published date. So when I came to receipts, I actually went ahead and added all of these columns that I think I will need, which actually makes sense. The name of the file, the title of it, content type, the account type, date, time, full, reference tip, all of these things I thought I would need it. So I actually went and added as a content type site columns, and I put all that into my receipts content type. Now, once I created over here, I actually had to use it in my content center. Now, it did take up to 24 hours for that content which I had created to start propagating across my entire SharePoint. So it's not the situation where I went and created all those content types over there, switched over to this content center over here, and I was able to build a model. It didn't work that fast. I actually had to wait a solid 24 hours because the content type had to show up over here. Well, now that it did show up, here is the model that I created. Okay, so model for me is actually the receipts model. This is something that I did by myself, and it's pretty standard process. When you go ahead and create any models, either the custom one or it's any of the existing one, you still have to do some training. So I still had to have a bunch of files ready for it to analyze. Now, one of the things that I had already done was I was already taking pictures of my receipts that I was getting. Because every time I travel for these conferences, the places that I eat, if I had to fill up gas somewhere, parking, sometimes I go in and drop my car at the airport, all of those gave me receipts. And I needed a way to go ahead and save these receipts, but also a way for AI to just process it and automatically assign the metadata. And Microsoft Syntex was the perfect answer for that. So this was actually my first scenario that I used it after I taught myself. And I've been using this for a few months now, and I love it. So here's what it is. When I did all the training, I actually had all of these files available. And as you can see, a lot of these were actually gas type, scanning from any of the receipts. I did all of this. But you know what the beauty is? Now let me back up, because you all know me as the Power Apps person. I have built a bunch of Canvas apps. I could have built an app which would do all of the scanning, and I would upload it to my library. But there's one beautiful app that I use, and that's actually the OneDrive app. It's something that even you might already have access to it, and its scanning functionality is phenomenal. And I'll demonstrate that to you in a few minutes. So here I went ahead and actually did all of my training. As you can see, it tells me these are the files. I went ahead and analyzed it. I went ahead and assigned it to all of this metadata, the metadata which I showed you from the content types. These are all of it. Went ahead and assigned that. And then after I went through all the training, I specifically said, okay, once I've done the training, where do I want to assign this model? And so right over here, it says where the model is applied. Well, it's actually in this receipts document library. So this receipts document library is actually in my site. This is one of the sites that I've already been using for my document libraries. So what I did was I did a change because I already had in my site contents, I had a document library, the one which is available out of the box. And over there, I was storing all of my information. So what I did was I actually created a separate document library and I just called it receipts. And in that library is where I assigned the model. The moment I did that, all of these other content types came up over here. So let me actually show you, it makes more sense. If I go into the settings, library settings, and yep, I'll click on the more library settings. Right now, when you come over here, see that receipts content type. Right, this is the syntax model that we created, but now it has gone ahead and added the content types, and along with it came all of those metadata columns that we went and added ourselves. And that is the beauty of using those content types. See, it's all kind of making sense why this is the perfect model to go ahead and use it for the syntax side. But let's continue, right? So I went ahead and added all of this in, and now I actually have a dedicated document library for all of my receipts. But the beauty of that is now that I have that document library, when I go ahead and add a new receipt, I could actually assign a little bit more metadata to it. Granted, the title automatically would come up from the receipt most of the time, or I could type in the title. When I say title, it's actually these names. But I was able to go ahead and even say, okay, what type of receipt is it? What was the month? What was the date? I was able to do all of that because of the metadata already added. But let me show you how that actually works. So here is my iPhone, that is my smartphone. And over here, I'm not actually going to the SharePoint app, but I'm going to go to the OneDrive app. And here's why. So once I click on OneDrive, I am able to see all of the sites and the libraries that are in the site. So just a second ago, I showed you one of my sites called Projects. And here it is. Over here, I'm going to click on Projects. And once I click on Projects, it has that receipts document library, again, that I just showed you. So I'm going to click on the receipts document library, and I'm able to see all of this information over here. But the beauty of the OneDrive app is actually the camera functionality, because this camera functionality that I'm going to show you is not there in the Power Apps, and therefore I am using what I already have access to, which is the OneDrive mobile app. But let's demo that. So I'm going to click on this camera icon, and over here is the first receipt. So in the first receipt, as you can see, it is going to do a capture of a document, and it already goes ahead and selects the document itself. It's even telling me, hey, that's just the section of this receipt. Is that what you want to capture? So I'm going to click on the button, and that's great. So I captured it, and it's asking me, do you want to tweak any of that? I say, yeah, sure. On the bottom right, I'll actually make it a little bit bigger. That looks good. Click on confirm, and now it just showed me the receipt, and this is amazing. So I'm going to say, okay, everything looks good. I'll click on done, and now it is saying, okay, where do you want to save it to? The other thing is, you see on the top how it went in and actually put in a title. Well, I want to change that title. So if I go ahead and start typing the title in, over here on my iPhone, it comes up as a scan text. So when I click on the scan text, what I'm going to do is actually just scan the top, and I'll click on insert, and that gave me the whole text over there. Now, granted, I can actually go and tweak this a little bit because I don't want all of this functionalities. I can actually just delete all of this, and yeah, I'll just make sure that it's only got the text that I want. So that looks good. And now on the category section, this is not a restaurant. This was actually gas, so I'll select gas. And now I've got at least some amount of metadata which I already need. So again, it's on the receipts. I'll click on save. And now it's actually going ahead and saving that into that document library. So let's do another example. So now I want to take another receipt. This is a receipt of a home and garden place which I always visit. So I'm going to go and do a scan, capture that. And it's already done a good job giving me all the four corners. So I'll click on confirm. Once I click on confirm, I'll say everything looks good. Click on done. And over here, it is still going to save it to the receipts project document library, which is good. But in the category, I'll click on category, and I'm just going to go and say grocery. And then again, let's go ahead and change that title. So I'll select the title. And as I select the title, it's going to say, do you want to scan a text? I say, yes, I'm going to scan a text. And then right over here at the top, I'll go and select on insert. It put all of this information in. Let's do a little bit of cleaning up. I only want a few sections of it. So I'll say select. Yeah, let me go and delete all of this. In fact, let me just do a little bit more deleting. I don't want all of this information in. This itself is good. and I like all my settings, so I'll just go and click on save. So now I'm actually done with using the OneDrive app. Now let's go back and take a look at it from the SharePoint library. Okay, so I'm back in my SharePoint library, and this is that project site that I talked about. This is the receipts document library. And over here, you can actually see that these were the two items that I just scanned. They were two receipts. So let's process this for a minute. First of all, if I just scroll to the right, you will actually see that, hey, these are the ones that were just submitted a few seconds ago by me, because I was the one who used the app. But the image that we took, it was able to go ahead and identify the category. The category is what we selected in the app. Second thing is it does have the correct content type, the receipts content type, which we use for Syntex. But third, that image that we took, it automatically went ahead and converted that into a PDF file. I mean, there's a lot of processing that it does all in the back end to make it so much more easier for us. But here's the beauty now. Now we are in this document library. There is the Syntex content type assigned over here, which means that the moment you go and add a new item, the Syntex processing automatically gets triggered. So in a few minutes, you should be able to now see all your new metadata assigned to it over here. And that's one of the things that you just have to wait for, because the processing can take time. It also depends on how much content you're adding over here. So once you're able to go ahead and automatically populate this, and think about it from an everyday standpoint. I used it from my mobile device. I went and scanned a receipt. I'm not going to come over here and just wait for it to be done. I'll just continue for my day-to-day life. But then in the back end, this is automatically going ahead and getting triggered. And then once this kicks off and then the processing happens, you will see the metadata get updated over here. So we looked at this model. Now I want to just pay a few minutes to the future things that are coming. So when it comes to Microsoft Syntex, specifically those items that were announced during Ignite, there are a couple of things that are coming up in the 2023. And here what it is. In the roadmap, as of right now, all of these enhancements and connections and managers are available. But each of these, for example, for the enhancements coming in 2023, there's going to be the image tagging functionality, which is pretty neat because it helps to make the search much better. Again, in the managed side, more backup and restoring and archiving functionalities. And then in the future, something that they're going to be available on is to take all the data and also make it available in Data Lake. And I want to end by thanking both Joanne and Treb for teaching me about this. Because in the 365 EduCon conference, I've had the pleasure of attending both of their sessions, and each of them have deep dive in different sections of the Microsoft Syntex. Back then it was called SharePoint Syntex, and I learned so much from them that it was about a year that I had learned about all of this, and I got excited because I saw the use of this for my own personal receipts, for my own personal use, and so I started leveraging it. And therefore, I really want to thank both of them from the bottom of my heart. And in the description below, I've actually put links to their sites and their information. And go ahead and join them on Twitter because they're always sharing great content. So hopefully this video gives you a good overview of Microsoft Syntex, both the past, present, and the future. And the demo that I showed you encourages you to start using it, because not only do you have potential to use this for your businesses, but you also can use it for your day-to-day activities, how I use to go ahead and scan all my receipts and automatically capture its metadata. So hopefully this video was helpful to you. And as always, keep using Microsoft Syntex. Hey everyone, hopefully you found this video useful. And if you did, can you help me help you? Can you subscribe to this YouTube channel? Because remember, I provide fresh content on a weekly basis and it's 100% free. So if you have subscribed, thank you so much and pass the word. But if you haven't, subscribe, click on the bell notification and let the learning begin.